I'll just ask that, I'll just let you know that we do have this meeting live streamed, of course, and if we could just make a note of the emergency procedures on the screen and that you can make sure your phone is switched to silent mode. I'd just say, particularly for councillors and staff, it's obviously quite wet and wild out there at the moment and quite a bit happening around Lower Hutt and the wider region. And I would just say that if the situation does deteriorate quickly out there, then we may just need to adjourn the meeting at certain points, just for people to be able to do what they need to do. So we'll just see how we go from that. Remember from our last experience of when we were in here, that things could change quickly. Okay, so we'll move through to opening karakia. Whakatakatahau ki te uru, whakatakatahau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā tada ki tai, e hiaki ana te atakura, he tio, hei huka, hei hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Apologies, we've received no apologies, and just to note we have Councillor Tupou and Councillor Morgan attending via Zoom. So we can move straight now through to public comment. And the speakers we have, so we've got 3 speakers today. First up, we have Helen Swales, Coordinator of Jackson Street Program, speaking to item 5A, the draft annual plan initial direction setting. Oh, sure. Who would you like to go first? Nick? Oh, well, yeah, no problem. Yep, sure. Yep, so 3 minutes, Nick. Over to you.
Kia ora tātou katoa, ko Nick Sangaropoulos toku ingoa. Thanks, everybody, for the opportunity to submit on our proposal today. I'm just going to say a few words about some context about the Jackson Street sort of program and history, and then we'll pass on through to Robbie and to Helen for the remainder of our submission. At the same time that Petone amalgamated with Lower Hutt City in 1989, it was undergoing a major transformation away from its rich industrial history. There had been a series of factory closures. Notable amongst them was the Gear Meat and the General Motors in the 80s, resulting in about 2,000 job losses. Petone was facing an existential threat at that time. And the downstream effect of the closures on the local businesses and the wider community was huge, and the town centre was quickly hollowing out. In response to that threat, that existential threat at that time, locals led by Roy Hewson, Andy Leslie and others were prominently, they basically organised the locals. They made a plan for post-industrial Petone. They organised a meeting of over 200 at a meeting in Petone, and that basically put in place a proposal to build a Main Street program for Petone. That proposal went to the Hutt City, the newly formed council. It received support, and before long, we had the origins of the Jackson Street program. So that's sort of like just a bit of context and background as to where the Jackson Street program came from, and it was heavily supported by the newly formed council back in around about 1992, I should say. Local businesses heavily backed the program and heavily engaged with the program, and significant milestones occurred very early on in that period. So the first thing that occurred was the old historic police station in Elizabeth Street was moved to the centre of town, and that shortly thereafter became the headquarters of the program. The next big major milestone that occurred was the Grand National Hotel, much loved by all the locals, was set for demolition, but within a short period of time, the locals got together and managed to save it from demolition and got it moved to the middle of town, right next to the police station. The next milestone was the beginning of the foundation of the Walk of Champions program, which, as many of you noticed, began laying foundation plaques of the sporting champions of Petone. So in a nutshell, basically a whole set of building blocks were put in place to really turn around turn around the sort of the feel of the place. So after these critical establishment found events, the Jackson Street program settled into a pattern of supporting and promoting local business. So fast forward to today, we basically are facing another sort of, Petone is facing another set of, basically an existential threat, I think. There's a whole lot of things that have converged at the same time. So we've got, as you guys know, obviously the rates increases, which applies to everybody, but it is particularly difficult when you've got a whole lot of other things going on Petone. We've got nosebleed insurance levels going up, which are just astronomical, and in many cases are threatening businesses with closure, or at least self-insuring and taking massive risk. Obviously, we've got things like interest rates, the macroeconomic environment, discretionary spend dropping, and we've got obviously paid parking now, and we've got the infrastructure events. So essentially, a confluence of a whole lot of things that are creating massive existential threat to many businesses in Petone and to the wider business community. So that's really just a context for you for the next part of the submission. And, just in conclusion, I would say that these are extremely challenging times, and we look forward to working collaboratively with the council to try and navigate these extremely choppy waters. Kia ora. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Robbie.
Kia ora koutou, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity again to speak. Robbie Schneider, a business owner, property owner in Petone, and board member of the Jackson Street program for over 10 years, which I just realised is about a third of the existence of the time period of the Jackson Street program. At our submission earlier, and so thanks for the opportunity to talk about the increased footprint for the Jackson Street program, which is what I understand today's meeting is about. At our submission earlier, I spoke about the business and the vision for business and the importance of the business community to Lower Hutt City as a whole. And I highlighted, 6 key aspects of that, in particular the economic impact of business, the community development, the innovation and entrepreneurship, the social fabric, infrastructure and gentrification. And then I highlighted 11 businesses, which many of you will be aware of. Amazing companies like New Ends, which is the world's first silicon nitrate, happening down in Seaview. Earth 360, which is making the orb for NASA. And we have incredible innovation here in Lower Hutt. So the Jackson Street program has become the conduit for business voice in the Petone region. And, what we are doing is we're holding meetings on a regular basis. Our business after 5 networking events, we will get 50 to 60 people, business owners come along. We'll discuss business issues. So we've got one coming up around insurance and the implications of that. So are people able to claim on their business interruption insurance if the waterworks that's planned interrupts their business, for example? So where do business owners get that information on how things work is usually through the Jackson Street program. We've become the trusted advisor, the go-to place for many of the business owners. So they'll come to Helen and ask, what happens when COVID hits? How do I get masks? And they don't always have the English language. So we'll navigate all of that territory for the business owners. And so we're also at the grassroots level for, as Nick highlighted, activity across the Petone community. So I've just wanted to really emphasise the importance to the business community of the work that the Jackson Street program does. We are the first port of call for the businesses, small, medium, and the larger ones are obviously managing themselves. We also, of course, as I'm sure you're aware, managing the colour palettes and the facades and the heritage and history for the Jackson Street and Petone region. So this is not our first time to ask for the footprint to be enlarged and increased, to acknowledge the great work that's been done in the program. And thank you for your attention and support of this for the JSP and the business community.
Any questions from members? I'll ask a question, and I suppose it could also probably be to all 3 of you.
Sure.
You certainly made a really strong point through the LTP process around costs on businesses and the impact of the rates increase. I mean, has your view changed after listening to and hearing from those businesses around potentially us in the next annual plan levying an additional rates increase through this targeted rate and obviously expanding that footprint. Has your view changed based on what you were hearing from businesses and what you were telling us in the last LTP?
I mean, I think we're yet to quantify that at a real term at ground level of the exact impact. But I think for the value, the cost is negligible from the business owner's perspective. And we're talking about, 0.5 to 1%, I can't remember the exact number, of an increase to their overall rates. But to have a voice at the table, to be heard, to be understood, to be represented, that has value. And so they can see the tangible, real result of that.
No, thanks. Any other questions? Helen. Thanks, Robbie.
Morning, Mayor and councillors, and once again, thank you for the opportunity to come and present our case with regard to supporting an increase in our footprint. What I'd like to say is that we have 5 POs that we as an organisation upheld. One is encouraging the awareness of Petone as a heritage destination, encouraging investment, business development, marketing and promotion, and building strong relationships. If I can go back to the first PO of that, this council has shown that heritage is really an integral part in their decision making with regard to what you've done with the Petone Wharf. I can say that since COVID, we have attracted more visitors wanting to come to visit our street because we're the only heritage precinct that we have. By default, we have become the tourist place and destination because we no longer have one in the CBD. The numbers have climbed since COVID, and we're putting pressure on the 58 hours that our staff are actually employed. So that's only 1.25 of a FTE. And when you think of the programs that we deliver, under Heritage, we have the schools, the local schools, come to us and talk to us about what are the stories behind policing, what is the story behind the European settlement of Petone, because we certainly don't do mana whenua, that is their story to tell, but we certainly engage with them with regard to any artefacts that we put up on our walls. When it comes to encouraging investment, I think if you look along Jackson Street, you will see our occupancy rate is really high when you compare it to other parts of the city and in New Zealand. And that's because we actively work really hard to make sure that our vacancy rates are really low. The other thing is with regard to business development, we make sure that we are the grassroots level. So you look, if you want to compare us to the Chamber of Commerce, Chamber of Commerce could be viewed as the university, and Jackson Street could be viewed as the grassroots polytech, where we actually look at doing things that are more hands-on rather than just targeting those that are at management or senior management level. And I think that's the distinction that we make between the Chamber and ourselves. We prove that in the points and the topics that we use with regard to our business after 5. We make sure that they're aware of all the legislative changes, not only nationally, particularly around the waste minimisation, but also around the local changes with regard to this council. And the most immediate one is the fees and charges that you're looking at introducing or consulting on with regard to the Liquor and Alcohol Act. So building strong partnerships and relationships, we've worked with this council when the bill came in with regards to the facades and parapets. We supported this council writing to MB to say that March was no longer a feasible thing to correct this, that we actually got an extension to September. We pulled all of the businesses that had an issue with that in a room where officers of this council and Wellington City Council and our referred Hampton Jones to come and talk. We were ready to sign the contracts, and we met weekly with the officers here to make sure that we were on target. We're part, and we really appreciate that we're inclusive in any consultation that this council does with regard to any cycleways or anything that pertains to Petone, and we appreciate that you value our voice in those areas. But, things are changing, and we really do believe that we do add value to the businesses, and we are starting to expand that. We have appointed a 12-hour person to look at promotions and marketing to make Petone first point of call that is in their scope when they come. I'm going to leave it at that because I know I've understood that I've gone past the 3 minutes, but Your Worship, can I answer your question?
Sure, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Right. So you're right. The economic times are really, really hard and no one is escaping the economic times. But where I think Jackson Street program can justify the increase in our footprint is the value add that we actually give to the businesses that are not only along Jackson Street, but remember, it's not just businesses, it's landlords and it's the other businesses outside that area that are starting to get the benefit of the work that we've done. We can't, and yes, it will be an increase on their target, but times are moving so fast and so dramatically with district plan changes, with RMA changes, that Jackson Street program has started to become more of an advocacy voice, and you can't put a dollar value on that when it comes to things that actually have a strong influence on the business community. So yes, we are asking for more money to be imposed through a targeted rate, but we believe that the value that we give to those businesses and the community, not only residents and businesses, actually stacks up against that targeted rate that we're asking for. Thank you.
Happy to, if there's any other questions. Councillor Briggs.
Thanks for coming in, Helen. And so last time you came in to present, we talked around the number of businesses that had voluntarily signed up to support Jackson Street program. And so if you were saying those businesses, particularly on the fringe areas of Petone, are seeing that value, what's your increase been since you've come in around voluntary membership and sign-ups to JSP?
So if you think that what we've done, and we need to review this because of the cost, we were inviting those people to join us for $125 each. Yes, they do see the value, and we combine them in reels. So we've started working with the Airbnbs around WOW and putting up as the preferred venue, because our only competition is the hotels in Wellington, and we've decided that actually we can come up against them and we're only 8 minutes away or 10 minutes away from the council. So yes, they do see there's a perceived interest, but when you've only got limited hours, 58 hours, controlling and managing a database is not always easy to do with the limited time that you've got. And I'm sure that anyone that deals with a prescription-based entity will tell you that in these days it's quite hard to maintain and to actually get them to pay, even though they see a worth there, that a targeted rate, like some of the other targeted rates that we do through our rates, would be a preferred option for us.
Councillor Dyer.
That was the best tactic I've ever seen to extend your submission time by answering a previous question. First question is on expanding the footprint. Is that because you're wanting to advocate for a wider group of people, or put it bluntly, you're wanting the extra revenue from the wider footprint?
To be absolutely blunt, it's both. If you look at the resources that we have in the Jackson Street program, it's 58 hours, 12 hours on someone that does promotions, 16 hours that does admin, and then myself that does 30 hours. The need and the demand in these critical times that we're facing, and we're not alone with businesses, everyone, our small businesses and our medium businesses are all looking at inwardly, and they don't have the capacity because the cost of inflation, the cost of goods, the cost of wages, all of those things have had to trim down their capacity to deliver their businesses, which means that they don't have the external knowledge or expertise to actually be a voice on behalf of them, and that's what Jackson Street has become. Yeah.
And then my second question was like,
No, we've got other questions. Sorry, so we've got three other people we want to ask questions. So Councillor Parkin, Deputy Mayor Lewis, Councillor Salinger. Councillor Parkin, Councillor Salinger.
Kara, thank you, Helen. So regarding the businesses that would be included in the expanded area, what other than obviously what Councillor Briggs has referred to in terms of the people who've chosen to join already, what data do you have on the percentage of those businesses that actually want to join?
So when we did the LTP consultation with regard to the LTP plan, I think we proved that the engagement that we do is that it's face-to-face, and we do letter drops and personal involvement. So through the amount of people that we had at the business meetings, I think we were well represented, not only from the businesses from Jackson Street, but the businesses that were around. There is a potential there that we had a lot of apologies. We did the meetings in the morning and in the afternoon. People understand that when you're a small business, you're so focused on it that emails are probably a long way to go. So out of the businesses that we want to extend our rate, I would say at least 50% of them are in support, but I haven't physically, we were going to go out and do a survey, and we would do that should this council agree that we could go out and have that conversation. We would do a survey of those businesses, and that would be done either through the council, which was done in which was done before, and that way it's more rigorous and independent.
Councillor Stallinger.
My question also. Thank you.
Right. Okay, Councillor Dyer, I'm happy to just go a bit longer on this because it's important on the direction we give on this matter. So, Councillor Dyer.
Thank you. So with the additional money, nearly double what you're currently getting and requesting, is it that your costs are just getting more expensive to deliver what you're doing, or are you wanting to like double the amount of hours, double the amount of staff that you've got? Like, are you wanting to provide additional services, or is it just that cost creep that everyone's experiencing everywhere?
You know, I feel a little bit guilty here because I'm going to say exactly the same thing as what I said before. It's both. and the reason why it is both is that a lot of the staff that work for us actually do a lot of unpaid hours. And it's realising that we've never been in a position to pay a living wage, which we feel really, really bad about. But our budget constraints are thus that we can't do that. We would also like to reintroduce the Barrowman, which we used to do with the Hutt City Council. It was a shared cost. And I think that with contracts and pressure on contracts and services that council have to look at across the board, you know, keeping our street tidy, keeping our drains free, particularly in weather like this, that the stormwater goes straight out to the sea, those were all things that were done by the Barrowman. Yes, we would like more hours with regard to doing promotional work and pushing it. We also need more resource in the heritage part of it, because more and more schools are starting to come with us, and we do talks where they come to the jail, and we make it really interesting and interactive. We actually pull together resources as well that they can take away for them, or come and do a treasure hunt around the historical things. So there are a lot of things there that probably we're not good at telling our own stories because we don't have the capacity to do that. But we certainly would be able to do that when we come with more literature to support the programs and the work that we do. Yes, we do want to expand, and yes, we would like to look at some innovation projects that support startup businesses, because we see that to test the water, sometimes the collaboration is what's needed in these constraints where costs are expensive to unlock the door.
We've got a couple more, and then we will need to move on. Deputy Mayor Lewis, Councillor Parkin.
Thank you, Helen and team, for coming in and presenting Jackson Street. Just in these times, you know, we're getting the message from the top that we should be sticking to our core business. Could you tell me, please, what the core business of Jackson Street is?
So if we go back to our original inception, which was around to bring back a vibrancy to a street that was dying, and the pose that we then did, which was around raising awareness of Petone, whether it was the heritage part of it or the vibrancy that we bring to the Greater Wellington or even to Hutt, right? So we also have the partnerships, which we feel are really important, and that's shown in partnerships that we have with council when we sit around the table assisting in the pre-consultation data that comes. We also see that, you know, the promotion of Petone, people don't see that we've actually got a number of things that are actually starting to converge on Petone. With regard to Riverlink happening, that's going to be an activation for Petone. Also with the walkway and the cycleway that's coming through, we're already looking at opportunities for business to come and take advantage, whether they're cycleways or tuk-tuks or whatever, to add value to what we already do. But, you know, every time we look at, and we're always challenging ourselves to look outside the square as to how we can develop more and be the crown and the jewel of the Hutt and a gateway.
Councillor Parkin.
Kia ora. You mentioned the fact that you're not a living wage accredited employer at the moment. Would you be happy as part of this process to confirm that you will be an accredited employer?
We would love to be able to do that, because it is a bit of an insult for the people that work for us to only get the annual increments of minimum wage. And we would certainly be happy to sign any document that would do that, because we do value the work of the people that work for us and what they do for the community, yes.
Similar question, Deputy Mayor Lewis. With everything going on at the moment and the focus on councils, do you consider what Jackson Street program provides through the targeted rate a nice to have or an absolute essential?
So when you break it down, and I think through the LTP, when you think that 40% of the rate...
Yes or no? Yes or no answer?
Yes, it is.
Absolutely. So it's not so it is a nice to have?
No, it's not.
No,
it's
it's
a
not.
necessity.
Okay, thank you. No, look, I agree with you. But I think that's going to be a challenging conversation councils will be having across the country after the last week. So thank you very much. Really appreciate your candour, and thank you for the work you do. And obviously we'll communicate post this meeting with where the council gets to.
I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity for the three of us to come and talk to you. It is appreciated. And I know that I don't envy you in the position and the decisions that you have to make at a helicopter view for our city. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, moving through conflict of interest declarations. Any conflicts to declare? No. Okay, we'll now move through to item 5, which is recommendations to council. 5A, which is the draft annual plan, initial direction setting, page 6 of the agenda. Jenny, I know you've got one of your beautiful presentations ready for us. I'm really sad to see the timeline on this one go right back to the start after making our way through that last amazing timeline. But I'll pass it over to you to make comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, everybody. Okay, so I'm going to take you through a high-level overview of this paper in front of you, and the slides should be in Diligent, published this morning. So the purpose of this paper is really to agree the high-level plan and approach for the annual plan 25-26. So the timeline, yes, it's nice and short, Mr. Mayor. There's hardly any meetings compared to our LTP process, and that's really off the back of the assumption that it is year 2 of the LTP. And so all those strategic priorities and conversations around levels of service and so on have been agreed, and that there wouldn't be many changes. So after today's meeting, the next decision point will be 25th of November and then the 24th of Feb to agree the draft plan. The paper talks to a high-level sort of light community engagement process for this annual plan, and then we'll work towards finalising the annual plan through to end of June following the engagement process. Okay, so the key decisions sought today. So agreement on that high-level plan and approach. We wanted to seek agreement on the key assumptions underpinning the annual plan, so things like inflation, interest costs, staffing costs. Officers are seeking direction from elected members around, direction for this annual plan process before we kick off our detailed work program for the annual plan. There's 2 key rating matters that we're seeking direction on. So the first one is that Jackson Street program that we've just heard submission on. And the second one is a voluntary targeted rate for wastewater and stormwater repairs on private properties. And this is off the back of work that happened through the LTP 2021, where we developed a policy, and then there was change in legislation, the Credit Contracts and Consumer Finance Act, and we basically put a pause on that policy. So just recently, there has been an exemption for voluntary targeted rates for that legislation. So there's an opportunity to bring that policy back in place if you'd like to. Okay, so there's a few other papers in the agenda today that all relate to the annual plan. We've got the Jackson Street Three Waters Renewals Program. It has been through Infrastructure and Regulatory Committee, and so the paper today is really focusing on the finance aspects. Micromobility program, we've heard from the government that there's a dialing back of funding for micromobility, and there's some options presented to council for decisions today. And then the last 2 papers relate to largely carryover, so work that wasn't completed in 23-24, and some proposed rephasing of that work program over the next few years. Okay, so just at a high level, the approach that's proposed in this paper, basically assuming that there's limited changes for this annual plan 25-26, because it is year 2 of the LTP. All the overall strategic priorities remain in place and levels of service remain unchanged, and that there's a light community engagement process. We are aware of a number of financial challenges that we need to deal with through this annual plan process, and I've got some examples in the slide there. So later this week, we're expecting to hear from Standard & Poor's credit rating agency. They've done their annual review, and we are expecting that it will be a downgrade to our rating. So we'll need to deal with the higher debt costs that will incur as a result of that. We've also had Days Bay wastewater issues recently. We'll need to deal with the costs of that. And in September, we're expecting latest information from the government around the transport funding, and there may well be some budget gaps that we need to deal with as a result of that. So all of those will bring back advice in November to work through those. The paper does talk about officers undertaking work to look for potential offsets for cost pressures. So things like further savings, reprioritisation, rephasing, and so on. We do know that it's going to be really challenging to find those, given all the detailed budget review processes that we went through as part of the LTP process. So it is an opportunity today for Council to give us direction on any areas that you'd like us to potentially look at for offsets. So any, for example, a service level area that you may want to dial back a little bit. A quick reminder about the financial context from the LTP. So we're just focusing on 25-26 year for this annual plan. So the rates increase that's baked into the annual plan is a 13.4% rates increase after growth. We've got a massive big capital investment program of $300 million for that year, and net debt is projected to increase to up to $677 million. And in terms of our operating budgets, we've got a projected deficit of $24 million. The report's got some information around the key assumptions, financial assumptions, and we're seeking direction on those. Just a few of them summarised here. So inflation, we've received the latest Burl Local Government Cost Index inflation information, and whilst it's the same number for 25-26, the rest of the years are slightly higher increase, slightly higher numbers. So we'll need to adjust for those through the annual plan process. Some good news on the interest costs. So latest advice from our Treasury advisors is that the projected interest rates are slightly lower than what we had in the LTP. So that's good news. And in the paper, we talked to an assumption around the employee salary increase, and we've proposed that we keep them the same as what was in the LTP. So for 25-26, that would be a 3.5% increase for salaries. Okay, then just to wrap up, there is some information around water reform. We've got some projections, some modelling that's been completed, and just giving you a high-level overview of those. So this is obviously linking into the work that's happening at a Wellington regional level around the new CCO for water services. Obviously, it's early days, lots of uncertainty as to exactly how that's going to play out, and it's early concept development mode at this stage. The projections, the financial projections, basically show a really good news story. When we strip out all from our balance sheet, the assets and liabilities related to water services and pull out the capital program and so on, all our indicators basically move more favourably. So, debt levels drop off, and so on. So it's all looking very favourable if that reform does proceed. So I'll wrap up there, and I'm happy to take any questions before we move on to the other papers. Thank you.
Any questions? No questions? Councillor Parkin?
Kia ora. So one of the things that I did note in there that we're still anticipating higher than expected increases in wage and salary. I'm just wondering when this was written versus what's currently happening with central government cutting jobs, is that having a downwards pressure effect?
Well, Councillor Parkin, we can probably both have a go at that. You'll recall through the LTP that we started out at a higher level for those 2 years, and acknowledging we cut it by a number, and then we cut it again to bring that down to 3.5, which, looking at our neighbours, is still slightly lower than them. But what you put in the LTP for this current round is proving to be correct. And we've still obviously got living wage increases, which take up a significant amount of that, which isn't impacted by what's happening at some of those more senior levels. As we are recruiting for jobs at the moment, we are certainly finding at that sort of professional technical level that there are more applicants in the market, and the salaries are keener, recognising that our salaries here are not the same as some others. So that's why our advice at the moment is to leave it as it is. If there is a positive change to make, we'd suggest it's probably the year after this one, because we were still quite tight against it, having reduced it quite significantly this time. But we'll continue to monitor the job market and what comes through, and we'll report that through as part of our quarterly performance monitoring.
Any other questions? Councillor Stallinger.
Maybe not one for necessarily a response or further discussion right now, because not relevant to the year ahead of us, but I was really interested in the early paper we have here on the impact of the water services transition. So I'm not sure when we'd next get a chance, but if I just outline maybe for now a couple of the key points I saw from that which kind of raised questions. The first one was, yeah, great, we look a lot better projecting forward with the water business gone, but then, you know, the issues are still the same. A part of the business has just been moved to another entity. So if we're looking a lot better, someone's looking a lot worse. So I had a quick look. I may have not 100% sure I got the figures right, but you know, we have a limit at the moment of 250% debt to rates, I think it is. We'd be passing across a situation of revenue to debt of 370% to the new entity on day one. And then looking at the capital expenditure plan for the next few years, I wonder how, or whether that entity would actually come even within the newly expressed higher borrowing limits. So I've just got a bit of concern about the viability of that entity seeing this, if other councils are passing on a similar ratio of debt to revenue. So that's just one. The other one was just looking at our position once it's all stripped out. I'm left at a bit of a loss to explain the level of rates increase in our business aside from water, because we're left with, over recent years and projecting forward, a level of rates increase which is still pretty extreme. And I had a quick look back, and if we were to compare 2020 to 2030, we'd have a rates increase, excluding water, of well over 200%. Inflation over that period has been about 40% for local government. So I think it would be good to have a discussion is, when we're going out and talking to people, we've previously used the explanation, decades of underinvestment, look at the water pipes. If that's gone, how are we explaining that very high level of rates increase? I don't really have an answer. So if you want to respond now, we're happy to talk later.
Yeah, for later. But Jenny, do you want to respond to that in regards to the data and information we have right now?
Yeah, first up, I'd just say that on Friday there is a briefing with Dougal and so on for elected members, and they're going to be talking through some of the finance aspects there. The new entity, there's obviously different settings with LGFA funding, debt to revenue ratios potentially going up to over 500%. So, you know, it's quite a different setting. In terms of the rates numbers that are sitting in the modelling that we've done, just to say, you know, we have tried to do the best that we can off the assumptions baked into the LTP. Whilst the rates increase may look like a big number, you know, there's some tens and sevens and so on, the actual quantum, you know, it's off a much lower base. So the actual dollar, you probably need to focus on the dollar impact of the rates rather than the percentage, and look at that aspect, and you'll see that, you know, the rates increases are much, much lower compared to with three waters in them.
Makes sense? Yeah, it does, yeah. Councillor Dyer?
I had a similar question. I'm hoping what you just said is the actual answer, that in the outer years, the rates actually switch from post-water reform to actually being a larger increase than what we're currently proposing through our LTP. Is that because of what you've just said with the rate percentages actually being a lower base? Yeah, cool.
And we just need to remember all the other things that drove up the rates increase as well, particularly in the transport area, off the back of those procurement processes that we did last year. So it's, we've been hit by cost pressures across a lot of areas and also interest costs and so on. So there's been a whole bunch of factors that have impacted our overall increase in costs that we need to fund through rates.
Okay. Obviously, still a lot more work to do, and I think there will need to be some really clear transparency for our ratepayers once any type of transition happens, so they can understand exactly, what the books look like with water out. And because I think that question will be exactly one that is raised and fairly raised, so we'll need to go through that carefully. And I would also agree with Councillor Stallinger's point around the viability of the entity without government still stepping in with a whole heap of cash or some form of additional funding. So there is some question marks around that, which I know other councils share right across the country, even with the additional borrowing ability to revenue. Okay, so we'll keep moving through. No other questions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Mitchell.
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions about the voluntary targeted rate scheme, which we looked at a few years ago. And from memory at that time, we decided we wouldn't kind of offer that up front, but would be a lender of last resort if our ratepayers really needed it for the Know Your Pipes work. So do you have any information about how many people have taken up that in the past couple of years since we first discussed this?
Bruce, I'm not aware of any. Do you want to answer that question, please?
I've been advised by Wellington Water that the Hutt is actually, the Hutt residents have been really good in terms of responding to Knowing Your Pipes. So we've only got one outstanding at the moment. So everyone else has basically come up with the money themselves to do the repairs that need to be done. So they're just dealing with one owner at the moment. And some owners take 2 or 3 discussions before they come on board.
And, excuse me, now that we're able to offer this again, would we kind of hold the same position that we're a lender of last resort, or would this be something we would proactively offer to people to take the money through their rates?
For me, it would certainly be lender of last resort, that we'd be talking to owners about how they would fund this normally. If we find that that is not possible at all, then we would look at this as last resort.
Any other questions? Councillor Parkin.
Kia ora, probably another one to you, Bruce. If somebody does take this up, just a clarification, if the property is sold, is the entire amount due payable at the point of sale? Or?
From memory, no, it isn't. It still continues to be a targeted rate that sits owing on the property, and there is some security set aside for it as well, linked to the property. Yeah.
Okay, we're now going to move through to the other reports. So just with precedence of business under our standing order 10.4, I'll record precedence to items 5B, 5C, 5D. Move that. Do I have a seconder? Deputy Mayor Lewis. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. 5B is the Jackson Street Three Waters renewal, and that's on page 38 of the agenda. We've got Bruce here, of course. Bruce, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So as Jenny said previously, this has been agreed in principle by Council. So the matter today is really just looking at how we can fund this. So this report is putting up 2 options for you to consider. There's, well, more than 2 options, but we're recommending 2 options, either to bring forward some CapEx that is in the LTP at the moment, but it's not labelled, or it's labelled as generic at the moment, so it's not specified, or secondly, to give us direction to go away and look at projects across council that we might defer. So they were the 2 options. In terms of the second option, one of the factors that you don't know at the moment is what the cost is going to be of the Western Hills wastewater main. So we will know that information in November, by the November meeting. So that would give an opportunity for you to consider that as part of the mix.
Any questions for Bruce? Councillor Shaw.
Thanks for that, Bruce. Just in regards to your last comment, the Western Hills wastewater main, does that include the main as far north as up by the Taita Rock?
No, it doesn't. So this is just the section of the main that is underneath State Highway 2 and then goes for another 400 or 500 metres along State Highway 2.
Okay, any other questions? No? Okay, so now we have the recommendations in front of us, and these are, we've got a couple of options here. So obviously we've got 3 noting recommendations, and then we've got either agree to bring forward budget provision from the 3 water renewal budget in years 4 and 5 of the long-term plan to undertake this work, or direct officers to provide further advice to the next meeting of the subcommittee on projects other than within the 3 waters activity that might be deferred to offset the cost of this work. So those are the 2 options that we've got in front of us. Councillor Edwards, any?
Well, just sort of trying to work out on my own, it's really a question of the urgency of this work versus the urgency of unknown generic works in future years. I mean, it seems logical to bring forward the money and get on with this work, because wastewater and that kind of spillage in the middle of Petone, one of our busiest or second busiest shopping centres, is not a good look. But really, it comes down to advice from our professional officers as to among those urgencies. It seems to me that bringing forward the money is the best way to go.
So that would be, so both options sort of bring forward the money. It's just the case of whether we use the water budgets or whether we look to the wider organisation and getting some advice back on what that could look like. So that's the key direction here we're wanting to give. Councillor Dyer?
Yeah, we're just going to clarify, none of these options change the time frame for the work, it's just where the money is coming from. My question then was, why have we excluded the option on page 41 with new funding, i.e. just borrowing more? That's not an option in the recommendations. Is that, yeah, what's the reasons for not recommending that option?
That is an option that you can consider, but that will obviously have an impact and additional impact in terms of both the borrowing and in terms of the debt cap that you have.
Okay.
And it also, sorry, if I can just add, it also means a higher rates increase as well.
Councillor Parkin?
Kia ora. So at the LGNZ meeting last week, we also had, along with the announcement of the ability to borrow for the new entity 5 times its income, my understanding was that LGNZ were also the loan lenders for LGNZ, sorry, I've forgotten the name. LGFA, were happy to go up to something in the order of 3.5 times the income. I may have not quite got that correct, so I'm just wondering if we can have some information from officers as to how that impacts things.
Well, at this stage, it doesn't impact anything because we don't know exactly how it's going to roll out, but the announcements they've made is it only relates to growth-related councils, and they would be negotiating with those councils directly. So, there's a lot of uncertainty as to exactly what that means, and, we can't assume that it applies to us at this stage. We may well be excluded.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to move option B, which is that we seek further advice on information to come back outside of the water program, knowing that if we obviously start to take from within the water program, that just means that less will happen over that longer period of time. We can obviously get that advice to come back to us and then make a decision as well. So we can understand exactly where that would come from. Okay, any contrary views on that or a preference for option A? Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Thank you. No, my preference is for the generic one first, to go with the Three Waters budget rework. But when you've got that D in there, a combination of all these options, it sort of makes me think, like, is there a balancing trick we could do here to get a balance out across, to work the money better? But I don't know what's in the mix, that's the only thing. But it's just raised that question.
I think if we were to go with option B, which is in the recommendations, then we can consider that. And if we feel as if it's unpalatable of what would then not occur, then, we can, I don't think we, option of still going with option A or pulling it within the water renewal budget would still be there. I don't think we're taking that off the table, but we're certainly wanting that information to come back first. Yep. Councillor Stallinger, then Councillor Dyer.
I'd be happy to second that if that's your recommendation, Mr. Mayor. I think, it's a trade-off which I'm not in the best position to be able to make, so I'd be happy to take the advice of officers, and if we give them the widest ambit just to consider where that's best achieved without additional rates increases, I think that's the way to go.
Yep. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Councillor Dyer?
Yeah, happy to support option B, but unlike Deputy Mayor Lewis of being able to fall back to option A, I'd be more in favour of looking at new funding as opposed to bringing forward funding from those outer years, because we just know there's going to be so many issues if we're dipping into that pot of money now. We're just going to be even further trouble down the line. We've still got the Western Hills pipeline, we've still got the issues at Taita, which aren't even scoped yet. We've got the Eastern Hills reservoir that's not on there. We've got the outfall pipe, Days Bay, who knows how much that's going to be, plus the actual whole new outfall pipe that's not in our budget currently. So I'm loath to kind of dig into that money in the outer years that's there as a backup. So, but you're more than happy now to support option B of getting more information about what other non-water things we could tap into. But for me, the fallback then is, okay, we need to borrow more, noting that also in the years the rate increase would apply would be the same year that hopefully water's off our books.
I think I completely agree with the sentiment of what's to come and the challenges around prioritisation, but I think we have to be really careful not to straight away go to, well, let's just borrow more and rate more, particularly with the message that our ratepayers have given us. So, but I hear your point exactly. There's going to be a lot of pressure, and it's going to be difficult for us navigating the next 12 months as these other unknowns come to life. So it's a really fair point. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Okay, Three Waters capital carryovers, page 42 of the agenda. Bruce?
I have nothing to add to this.
Any questions? Pretty straightforward. I'll move recommendations 1 through to 3. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Dyer, any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. 5D, micro-mobility program. Paul or John, you're going to welcome John. Okay, got the report in front of us. Over to you. Any comments?
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, so this paper is part of the long-term plan. Councillors gave us direction that they'd like us to go away and see what we could deliver for the budget, particularly in this year. Whilst we will get confirmed final subsidy funding from, the confirmed numbers from Waka Kotahi sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks, it is extremely clear that there won't be the subsidy to progress with new walking and cycling projects. So indications are there is a small amount for maintenance of around just over $1 million for us, so which will go to maintaining sort of the Beltway, Petone Jameling, Te Pirahonuku, etc. So what we're seeking is a decision to use the unsubsidised amount, which is 7.28 million. So no contribution from Waka Kotahi to proceed with Taita and Avalon projects as part of micromobility. So the actual plans and the designs and those things will go to infrastructure and regulatory. This is seeking your decision on whether you want to proceed. You still want to proceed with funding this without any subsidy. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, John. Pretty clear. Any questions, Councillor Edwards? Was that a half hand going up? We'll go Councillor Mitchell first, then Edwards, Councillor Parkin.
Yeah, just contrary to your last statement there, I think it was a little bit unclear to me what we were being asked to agree to today. Point number 8 in the paper says that a cycleway strategic review, along with the Avalon and Taita project costs, are being revalidated, and this will be reported back to Infrastructure and Regulatory on 12th of September 2024. But what I just heard you say, John, is that you're asking us to agree to the Avalon cycleway and Taita cycleway today, and that's what the budget's attached to. Personally, I asked a lot of cycle advocates when they came in on our long-term plan what their priorities would be if we went down this road, and the answers were quite varied. So I'm still not clear for myself what our priorities are, whether they are these easy gains because we've already got plans for them, or whether we should be focusing on kind of continuing to develop our main trunk line of our cycleway networks. So are you asking us to agree to Avalon and Taita today?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, partly. So asking to use this non-subsidised amount for those. So if those are because we were asked to go away and have a look at what the updated costings for those will be. So they'll fit within, they're the only two that will actually fit within the budget we have unsubsidised. So if we look at the other designs we've done for sort of Waterloo to the CBD and then through the city, they're all reasonable amount over that 7.28. So if we want to proceed and get into construction and deliver cycleways between sort of over the next 10 to 12 months, then these are the two that we would have. So the other part is that plan, which is a small amount of money compared to the construction. We'll work on that, the designs for that main trunk line and how we get there. So Waka Kotahi are signalling that in the future there'll be a lot more data required in order for investment. So we'd be looking at sort of how you connect the Wainuiamata shared path with Te Purahonuku, with the next stage of the Beltway, with all of those things. So that's where that will be going. So.
Thank you. And it's noted here that the NLTP will be published in the last quarter of 2024. I don't know if we have a date for that, but we're really just working on an assumption that there's going to be no co-funding from NZTA.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, a very strong assumption.
Yeah, I think the strongest of possible assumptions. Sorry, I've lost my order. Councillor Edwards.
Yeah, look, it is a tricky one, and you'd have to ask questions about whether those two projects are our best bang for buck and all these kinds of things. But the simple fact is, is the way I see it, if we don't do these, we'll probably get no runs on board at all in the foreseeable future. They are worthwhile projects. We were about to sign them off before there was that NZTA change. I don't think having that cycleway review information is going to change much. We're still not going to be able to afford the other, probably more important projects, to be honest, Waterloo Road, some of those other ones through the city. But they're not going to happen because we haven't got the money. So my opinion is let's get some runs on the board with these two projects, subject to the validation of cost work that is going to come back to the committee.
Do we have, apologies, sorry, Councillor Shaw, Councillor Park, no? Councillor Shaw, Councillor Dyer?
Yeah, I have tendency to agree with Councillor Edwards here on this one. We want to get some runs on the board. But the question I have is about how much has already been spent on this particular project prior to funding being pulled?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd say off the top of my head, I don't actually have that. It's all through the detailed design. So there was significant funding, Waka Kotahi funding, to get us up to this point. So council money-wise, not a lot, but I can come back with you on that too. Just one other note too, if I may, Mr. Mayor. So the pool of walking and cycling funding for the country is quite constrained. It's not going to be very high. We will be benefiting significantly though from two pretty massive projects that are underway with Te Aratupua and Te Purahonuku, which will take a fairly significant chunk of the nationwide funding. So whilst we are still going to, and one's obviously a key priority for us. So we are getting the benefit of a whole lot of walking and cycling investment in the city as well. So.
Okay, Councillor Dyer.
Yeah, I had the exact same question about how much we spent today. For me, that's the most important reason for doing these two projects. From memory, it was several million we've already spent consulting and designing and doing flyovers for these projects. So for me, actually having that figure is actually quite important, because it's a sunk cost that if we don't do it now, we're not going to do it. And if we do these projects again, we're going to have to reconsult and redesign. So that's the main reason why I'll be supporting these two projects. My question is, though, that does say, paragraph 7 says we're prioritising these projects because they're ready for construction, but then under the consultation heading it says further project consultation will be undertaken as the project moves forward. Am I right in assuming that these are basically ready to send out the door and get started, and it's just the letting the public know that these are underway, etc., that's needed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So yeah, there's just a final consultation before we go into construction. So there may be some slight tweaks. We're just revisiting the designs, just seeing if there's anything needs to change. Yeah, no, as far as the design consultation goes, the main design is already done.
Okay. So have we got clarity on, because I just checking, Councillor Mitchell, you're comfortable with what is presented here in regards to like clarity of what we're doing? Because
Yes. I'll speak more to that in a moment.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Okay, so we've got the recommendations in front of us. Is there any particular view on this? Direction-wise? Councillor Stallinger?
Yeah, I'll support the recommendation there. I just was a bit concerned to see that there's an extra $400,000 of costs arising if we proceed down this path compared to what's in the budget at the moment, mainly to do with timing, I suppose, Officer, and the interest that arises from that. So we're away from having the costs confirmed at the moment, so I'd appreciate it just if that issue could be looked at. Maybe it's a question of phasing of the works, whereby we could have potentially avoid that extra cost. But I'm happy if that's just considered when it comes back to us over the coming months.
Okay, so Councillor Stallinger is happy to move recommendations. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Shaw. Any further discussion? Councillor Mitchell?
Yeah, at the risk of offending our cycling community, I am going to vote against this one. For the reasons that I discussed in the long-term plan, and when those cyclists were around that table, as I mentioned, there was pretty unclear steer from them on what they thought should be the priority of our cycleway spending if we ended up in this position of only spending our own money on the cycleways. What I said at the time was it would be really good to pause and take time to figure out what our priorities were. And I don't know that we've done that in a very particularly thorough way. We have a cycleway working group that hasn't met to discuss this. We haven't had any further consultation, as far as I know, with our cycling community. I understand completely why these are the easy options for us. My biggest concern, I guess, is what happens if we, and by we I mean Hutt City Council and future councils, don't see through this full program of work. And we're proposing here today a couple of connections that connect some schools and communities to the trunk line, which is incomplete, and gets them to Waterloo Station on the Beltway, but not into the CBD and not down to the waterfront either. So yeah, I guess my biggest concern is that if we're piecing together a cycleway network like this, if it doesn't all get done, what are we left with? And that's why my personal view is that we should be focusing on the main connections and how we afford those. I know we can't afford Waterloo Road with the money in front of us today, but my primary question would be, how then do we afford Waterloo Road? And how do we proceed and make that project a priority, those key connections a priority? Yeah, so that's my view on it, and that's why I'm going to vote against this one today, because my personal view is that these two connections aren't the priority.
Councillor Shaw.
I remember the excitement around the consultation at Walton Ash when we looked at the designs of video that was put out amongst the community. And I support the recommendations because I think we have a responsibility for those kids, tamariki and rangatani, from the Avalon and Taita to cycle through the network to provide a safe passage for those kids going to school. So for me, I'll support that.
Any other comment, Councillor Briggs, then Councillor Dyer?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Respect and understand Councillor Mitchell's perspective on this. I think the hard thing is we're needing to cut our cloth to the limitations of what we have, and that's very limited, particularly with the government deprioritising micromobility and the safety of our young people to get around our cities across the country. And so for us, it puts us in a challenging situation. I think back to former councillor Lisa Bridson, when I first came on council, and her priority there, which she kept referring to, was building connections to the main trunk. That if you cannot get from your community to the main trunk, then no one will be utilising the main trunk to its fullest. Acknowledging that there's still work to be done on those connections, both south to north, west to east as well, to make it more accessible to get to the key parts of our city. What I see this doing today is enabling some people in our community to be able to access the main trunk line more safely to get to those key points for them, but it's not the end. And so with what we have and our lack of support from government to do this, I think this is a pragmatic way of going forward. I think any further consultation or discussion won't land us anywhere without spending a whole lot of cost and not actually getting a better outcome. And so happy to support this today, but do advocate alongside Councillor Mitchell's perspective that there's a whole lot of questions we need to answer. And what does that look like for successive councils? What does that look like for our communities across the whole city as well?
Councillor Dye.
Yep, I'm happy to support these two. Without jumping to conclusions of what the single stage business case would show, I'm fairly confident it wouldn't say that these two cycleways are the best use of, or the best connections that are needed, top of the list. But for me, with the limited budget we've got, I can't see that money going towards any of the other much needed connections. Waterloo Road would probably spend this much just on consultation and design work and have nothing on the road. But as I said before, both these routes are were in our micromobility single stage plan. And for me, it's that sunk cost that we've already spent on the detailed design. We've already spent on consulting our residents that are kind of in limbo. Some wondering what's happening with that consultation you did maybe about a year ago on these awesome new connections. And the important one with the tighter connection is it's not just upgrading a route, it's actually putting in an entirely new route. There is no way to walk from Taita Drive to the river bank where we're proposing to do this other than walking on the road. So if you're in a pram or a wheelchair, you physically cannot get to the riverbank. So this isn't just improving and enhancing a connection for cyclists, it's actually creating an entirely new one. So I'm more than happy to support these two.
Okay, no other comment. Just to say that I think I agree with all the points, even though there is Councillor Mitchell who will be voting separately on this, differently on this. But for me, as Councillor Dye said, the sunk cost that has already gone into this, whether that be taxpayer or ratepayer dollars, is kind of redundant for me. I would hate to see this sit on a shelf and get to a point where it all needed to be done again, which is actually what has happened with different projects over a long period of time. So I think this is the way to go with the situation we find ourselves in. And I would say that while there is a clear government change of direction around funding for active transport, as John has said, it's actually a pretty exciting time in our region still, with the major projects that are happening with Tupua Horonuku around the entire Wellington Harbour, and also with the connection of the new bulk water bridge for the Hutt River Trail. So actually there is a lot going to be happening and coming online over the next 2 to 3 years. And of course, governments come and go, they change and directions change, and when appropriate, if there is a change of focus, we'll be ready to go with some of those larger projects to work alongside them on, because that's all part of our integrated transport strategy and making sure we're ready and can deal with these types of changes. So happy to support it. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Would you like that recorded, Councillor Mitchell? No? Okay, so moving through now to we're returning back to thank you, John, to the draft annual plan initial direction setting. So Jenny, any other comments you want to make just before we go into things? No, okay. So now we're just going to work through a few things. So the first one is agreeing to the high-level plan and approach to the draft annual plan. And this is on table 1 of the report, page 10, and that's recommendation 2. So I will just So we're happy with that timeline. We're comfortable with that. Yep. Okay. Now we're going to just move through to the agreed proposed approach to inflation assumptions outlined in paragraphs 29 to 31. And that's on table 2, page 14. Is there anything there that people have questions on or are unsure on at the moment? No? Okay, so now we'll move through to page 15, which is the proposed approach to interest cost assumptions. This is recommendation 9. No questions on that. Okay, now we're going to move through to considering the direction and guidance on the potential inclusion of a voluntary targeted rate for wastewater and stormwater repairs in private properties. So that's recommendation 13. Any comments on that? Councillor Dyer?
Yeah, really happy to support this one. It sounded great before, but obviously we know the reasons why we didn't progress. Those issues are now no longer an issue, but do completely agree with the questions earlier about it being a borrower of last resort. One area I think this could potentially be quite useful is with the Jackson Street works we're doing through there. A lot of that network was laid around the same sort of time, and there will be a lot of private connections to the works that are being done. And obviously it's already going to be a very long project, and we want to have as little delays as possible. So I think having sort of almost not proactive acceptance of the scheme, but the contractors need to be able to do the work as quickly as possible and not get to a private connection and go, oh, you need to fix this lateral. We're going to keep moving up the street, and then you have to come back and fix this. So this is one scheme where it does put it onto the property, which is obviously a slightly better thing for businesses that are struggling. So yeah, more than happy to support it.
I think that's agree with that. Councillor Salinger?
Yeah, likewise, very keen to support this. I know it's been successful in previous years as a way of getting perhaps prompt or reasonable coverage of agreement to the works needed. For some, it will be a burden to have to upfront the cost or increase their mortgage. So I think it's excellent if we've got something like this in place.
Okay. Any other comment? Great. Okay. So we can work. That's good. Consider direction and guidance on the potential rating policy changes for Jackson Street targeted rates. So this is the increase and obviously the footprint. Really important, I think, for us to give some direction here. I know from my perspective, when we, I suppose, kicked this for touch for this annual plan round, a lot has happened since then, and we have heard quite significantly from businesses in Jackson Street and in that area around the pressures that they are facing generally with cost increases. And I suppose the conversation in my mind here is whether any further increase on top of our proposed rates for year 2 of the LTP, are we willing to consider that? Because if we're not, then there's probably very little point to go through this process and ask officers to do all of that work in time and cost. So I think that's probably an open question for everyone around the table. Councillor Stallinger?
Yeah, I agree with your points, Mr. Mayor. It's a bit of a quandary on this one because they were certainly very vocal at meetings down there and in this room about the impact of rates upon them, but also do reflect on their meetings, the turnout and the engagement they get and the value they provide. To me, it comes down to whether the businesses or those that will be paying the rate are prepared to pay. So I'd be quite happy if there's a consultation to get to the extent that gave us that information. But aside from that, I wouldn't be prepared to support it going into the plan before that came through to us. So if it's not too expensive for the work to be done to gauge that, I'm happy to support it. But if it comes at a great big cost.
I suppose the hypothetical in my mind, knowing that we've sort of tried to navigate this issue previously, let's say it comes back that particularly for the larger footprint, half are for, half are against. Do we then levy everyone? Like, I suppose it's because I suspect that's the type of response we may get based on other submissions, and it may even have gone more against given the current climate versus where we've been in the past? I know that's a little bit of crystal ball gazing, but I suspect that's the position we're going to be in. Any other thoughts? Councillor Edwards and Councillor Briggs?
Yeah, I'm sort of with Councillor Stounger. That's enlarging the footprint is the only thing that I'm interested in, really. We can't let them do that. I think it should be an independent sort of a survey to get the genuine information that we need. It may be that they're in favour of it, and we'd have some basis to extend the rate. And you have said, Mr. Mayor, that it could be 50-50. Well, we often have to make difficult decisions like that, but at least we have some solid information on the level of support for extending the footprint. But like Councillor Stounger, I don't want us to spend a whole lot of money doing that survey. I don't know whether anyone's got an estimate of how much it might cost to get that sort of information and put this to bed once and for all, because it's going to keep cropping up.
Yeah, if we were to do, I mean, we're asking basically work out what the footprint is and send a survey to each of those ratepayers to ask them if they're willing to pay X. Is that the extent of it, Jenny? And I suppose, or what other work would potentially have to be done prior, if any?
Yeah, I'd need to defer to Jared around the consultation engagement process, but from a officer perspective, we'd need to obviously put a lot of time and energy into thinking about that policy change and working through the details of it. So we'd have to reprioritise our time to do that work. So it'd largely be officer time. And then, Jared, can you comment on the cost of the consultation?
I think I'm loath to give a cost without looking into it further. However, what we know from engaging businesses previously is it requires a lot of officer time to do face-to-face and direct engagement. So in terms of just supporting Jenny's response, there certainly would be a cost in terms of officer time, currently not on our engagement program, and also the development of the collateral to support that. So it would really be understanding the scope of the engagement, what council would be after, and then we'd be able to advise in terms of the cost and the resourcing requirements for that.
Councillor Edwards?
Is it my recollection when this last came up before council, when the Jackson Street program was talking about extending the footprint, there was mention that the cost on the existing businesses would reduce as a result of that enlarged footprint? I'm very aware of those things that Nick mentioned, all these pressures that are coming on those Jackson Street businesses. So I think that's another factor to weigh in.
Yes, I recall that the cost for the current businesses that are part of the targeted rate would reduce for them, but for all the new businesses that get added would be an extra cost for them. Yeah.
On the basis that there was no general increase as well. Yeah. Councillor Dye? Sorry, Councillor Briggs, did I skip you? Sorry, yep.
I've already got my mic on. What is the relationship between council and JSP? Do we have an MOU with them? Like, I was quite concerned to hear that they're not paying the living wage to their staff. Are they treated sort of as a contractor, or they're obviously not CCO, but do we have an MOU with them? Could we actually ask them to do certain things?
I'd need to take that away. I mean, Councillor Dyer, they're not a contractor, they're not a CCO. I suspect, in essence, we're doing some funding, but I'd need to take that away and come back to you properly. Yeah, so in essence, like a funding agreement. It will be a historic one. So with our contracts that are coming up, as you know, each time we get a new contract, we build the living wage in. Yeah, it's a bit surprising to hear that today.
Any other? Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I understand the request from JSP. I think in previous meetings we've discussed it. They haven't kind of demonstrated to me at all that the footprint that they want to increase to, they're actually asking for that as a community. I think I see it very much as an organisational scope change rather than the community requesting it. Going back to the voluntary memberships that they've had in place for a while, there hasn't been a significant update that's been evidence to us. And if those wider businesses were seeing that value, then they would likely have become members in supporting the kaupapa. And so I see a bit of a misalignment, as Helen mentioned today. They're wanting to even grow their scope even bigger than it is currently. And I think over time the scope has changed and evolved and grown from what it originally was to meet need. But actually, if they go back to their core business, that will actually remove some of that pressure they're currently under as well. Just as their members are actually going back to their core business and making sure they're working within their resources well. So it's, again, I understand the want to do more, I understand how that would add value to the community. But yeah, I definitely see a kind of a mismatch between the wider footprint. I can understand that if we were to do a poll, the existing members would happily want to see an increase in footprint because that would reduce their direct cost and spread it over others. But I'm pretty sure that the business owners in those other spaces wouldn't want to see an increase on their targeted rate as well. So the information we get back from that poll probably won't be any more than we already know today or that we can assume today. And so I'm a bit loath to go through an additional process and reallocate staff time to kind of know what we know. But yeah, that's what I'm currently sitting with, that tension.
Just the Madam Chief Executive.
With apologies to the Jackson Street programme and to all of you members, can I immediately withdraw what I said just a moment ago? There is no funding agreement with JSP. Obviously, we do some things together and work in partnership, but they are 100% financially independent, so make their own decisions. So apologies for that incorrect information that I gave you. Wanted to resolve that with you as quickly as possible.
Okay, Councillor Edwards and Councillor Dyer.
Very quick one. I wasn't actually envisaging polling existing members. I was thinking we would just poll the expanded footprint sort of area and ask them, do you see value in belonging to the Jackson Street program or not being part of the targeted rate? Keep it at that.
Okay. I think if we could look to, what I'm hearing here is that if we would look to try and do a bare bones consultation with the extended footprint, so they should be able to be identified, to be able to go out and say, hey, would you agree with X as an additional targeted rate to be part of Jackson Street program, and that information come back to council, and then we make a final decision on that as early as possible through this process. And we're not asking for the team to do any additional work, anything more than that. I mean, I don't think there would need to be, Jenny, this early in the process, further work to be done.
Well, I suppose we've got to be careful understanding the impact for those businesses. How much would the targeted rate be, working out what those business values are and what it would mean for them. So we need to get information that helps inform that decision for them as well, and some modelling and so on that I'm thinking needs to be done.
But that wouldn't be a huge exercise, I imagine, based on basically just applying the targeted rate to those businesses.
It's not a huge piece of work, no, but it is a piece of work we've got to do.
Okay, yeah, no, I think we just need to, what we're saying is we want to keep it bare bones, get that engagement, and then we can make a call if we're going to take that any further. Yep. Do we agree with that? Yep. Okay. Councillor Dyer?
Yeah, the public submissions today made quite a point around sort of the value they add, and for me, I'm absolutely not questioning the value they do. We know through the LTP how many people they brought out to their meetings. Yes, there were contentious issues in Petone, but there were still far more people that came along to the JSP meetings than, for instance, say the Petone Community Board meetings. They do some very heavy lifting for us from the pretty limited funding that they receive. So for me, I'm happy to support the request for the additional funding, provided that we can put in some requirements in there. One would be that we pay the living wage, and the second one would be around supporting the businesses through the disruption that's going to occur with the pipe work. That may already be from an existing budget within the council's comms team. We're spending $25-ish million on the pipe work. I'm assuming there's a line in there somewhere to say sort of business support while it's going through. So at this stage, I'm not entirely sure whether it should all come from the existing members or an extended footprint or a combination of the both, or something from the general rate, which is actually supporting the pipe project that I spoke about. And the other thing is, if it's not on the current comms team's work plan, there's 13 elected members in this room whose job it is to engage with the business community. So I'd be more than happy to get out and knock on some doors and have a chat to businesses if we can be supported by the comms team. It would be quite useful, I think. There's not a huge amount of business to get around, and it would be quite useful.
I just want to say that I don't want to confuse the the work that needs to be done on the pipes in Jackson Street with the targeted rate matter. I think that is an issue we need to navigate and we need to understand that. But also we've got significant disruption happening with Riverlink coming soon. So we need to think carefully about that matter. And so I'd just say that's a separate issue. We need to try, I think, just keep this clean. It's about the targeted rate for the extended footprint. And we just need to keep it at that rather than asking for additional things or requirements. I think we've got an indication from JSP that they'd like to be able to pay the living wage if they can. So that's something that hopefully should be easier to navigate down the track. Deputy Mayor Lewis.
Yeah, no, today's presentation was really good to hear the history of Jackson Street and how, the times they went through to form that program to support the community. What we've got now is, as I asked about the core business, it's really gone away from that as my understanding or what I see, to go into events to create people to come to the street. So to me, it is the core business. I don't know if eventing to me is the one thing that will do that. That's just my personal thoughts. The reflection of Jackson Street itself, bringing the draw card to the area, there's an opposite is true of that. The area has always been small industrial, little mum and dad business starting off, and now they're big companies. But it's the people on Jackson Street actually use those businesses in the small business area as well. So it's a win-win for everybody. So perhaps that JSP Street should be paying the small businesses. It could be reversed. I just think they support each other. So to see the targeted rate go from 158,000, 23-24 to go up to 300,000, that's the thing that I think as the councillors and as representing the whole of the city, that'll be on us. We're the ones that are going to wear that to justify how come these guys get this extra rate. And it's not, the elected people aware that it's not an incorporated society that are going to get, the impact of rates going up. So I think for the street and for council, they've got a good working relationship. And I think that sort of thing can continue, but sticking to core business and working with council to do the right thing for the whole area. And I think it's a win-win in that respect. But I don't think increasing the area for a targeted rate is going to benefit everybody. It's just not, don't agree with it, sorry.
Just for clarification, we're only talking here about an increase of the footprint, not to the overall targeted rate, just so we're all clear. So that's a clear direction we're giving from this meeting. So we're not saying we're increasing the levy, we're just saying it's going to broaden.
The footprint,
which will, of course, increase the total revenue.
That's right. That's where the revenue comes from. But that footprint, I say, is actually benefiting Jackson Street as well.
Yep. And I think what the council is saying here is that we want to hear from those ratepayers, and they can tell us that if that's the case, and we'll certainly take that on board. Councillor Mitchell? Oh, okay, I'm going to move us on now. Thank you. That's all clear as mud, the direction. Yeah. Yes. Didn't see nods. Okay, thank you. Okay, now we're going to move through to any other feedback. So any other direction or feedback from elected members at this point in the process? Councillor Briggs, Councillor Dyer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just reflecting on the Prime Minister's comments and Minister's comments last week at LGNZ, and whether there's any intent of officers to also reflect on those and how that incorporates into our annual plan as well going forward, and if there's any change that you see as well as a result of the announcements last week.
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is that it's important that we look at the, what is in writing and what is ultimately put through in legislation rather than potentially things that are said in a political speech. So that's the first thing I'd say. But one thing I certainly would be asking our team to be thinking about as part of the region as well is the city region, our regional deal framework, and what that potentially means for us and how we can best position ourselves. But that some of that may be out of our hands because we'll be relying on working with our colleagues as well. Any other reflections, Joe, from you based on the announcements this last week?
Thank you. As you said, there were speeches and then matters of things to come, and you have all just gone through a very significant period of lifting the lid, looking at what service standards you want. You took some proposals forward and didn't with others. So, and that's where you've got to the long-term plan. And hence, therefore, when we get to this other guidance type issue, you will know that in addition to that, we have looked at, there's an in-year deficit of just over $500,000 that we need to find savings on. And I think you know us all well enough to know that we don't go, oh, we've hit the 600,000, we can now relax. Every dollar we spend is taxpayers' money, and we need to look at where that is. It's very clear that the direction from you all is whatever other smoke there is, we need to be consuming our own smoke. So I suppose in relation to that guidance, I think we're largely doing what was said in speeches. We need to see what comes forward with the framework for city deals and indeed performance management. We've gone quite some way with that, you know, as to what we do. I think what we're saying here is if there is, you know, having gone through the LTP and set this direction, if there are now other things, not you know, whether that's responding to what was said at a conference last week or responding to what we know is happening in our own city with ratepayers, if you want to give us that guidance, then we can look further at that, Mr. Mayor. We can, you know, we can operationalise places you want us to go to.
Okay, any other, Councillor Dyer?
Yeah, largely happy with everything in here. The one thing I do have concerns about is just that pushing out of the balanced budget timeframe by another 2 years. It feels like we sort of started funding depreciation and we were predicting it was prudent at the time, I think, with a question mark maybe about where we were. And then as we moved forward 2 years, we pushed it out another 2 years, and we've moved it out another year, and we've pushed it out. And now another year, it's being proposed to push it out 2 years. So I feel like for me, it's just that goalpost just kind of keeps moving further and further away. Noting that in the water reform paper, it does show a lot more positively. But yeah, for me, I'm just really uneasy about continually pushing that goalpost out. For me, that's where we need to be trying to hit. If we keep moving it, we're never going to hit it.
Okay. The only one from me, and I don't want to be too directive on it, but we know there is the issue of unfunded mandates, which councils have been burdened with from successive governments over a long period of time, and our GNZ commissioned a piece of work on that. And I wonder if the team could just think about how we best capture data on what unfunded mandates look like for us moving forward. So when ultimately whoever the government of the day is puts additional requirements on us, that we can actually see the impact of that from a, you know, hopefully a monetary but also a time point of view on the organisation. And I think this is something that other councils, well, I know talking to mayors from around the country in the last week, they're considering as well. But any thoughts on that, Joe?
Yeah, no, we can look at that. And only last week we, which will be coming to your committee as on emergency management, we were not keen to take on from the government an unfunded mandate in relation to the Orfina welfare system, which came up through COVID. The government no longer wished to fund it. It doesn't really work that well, but they were very happy to give it to local government and ask us if we wanted to spend money on taking it on and making it work. And we're suggesting that we don't take that on for precisely those regions. So there's a lot of stuff that we probably just need to think about. I wouldn't have thought of capturing that as an unfunded mandate, but it would have been, and it would have been a cost. So we'll see what we can do to highlight the transparency of that to you as elected members and ratepayers around those matters, along with the other performance that we report on. So we'll reflect on that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, great. If there's no other direction, what we'll do now is just take a 1 minute break. We'll get the recommendations up on the screen as we've discussed, and we'll then take them to a vote. So bear with us for a moment. Okay, ready to go. Thanks, everyone. Now, we'll just pop those up on the screen. Okay, so we have our noting recommendations, agrees to the high-level plan and approach, which importantly includes, just so we're clear, that light touch engagement, as this is a year 2 of the annual plan. So really important that we're all on board with that. If there's any significant disagreement, now's the time to sort of signal that. No? Okay. Now moving through to the note, if we keep going down, noting recommendations. All these are in front of you. Yep. Okay, so now just to be clear, so 13 is supports in principle and directs officers to provide further advice on the potential inclusion of a voluntary targeted rate. So we're giving clear direction that we're supportive, but obviously we need more advice to be able to include it. 14 agrees to only consider an extension of the Jackson Street program footprint and not an increase to the targeted rate generally before, and then, comma or whatever, before advancing this any further, directs officers to undertake light consultation with those ratepayers who would be impacted by an extension of the footprint and report back to council on that engagement for further direction. Makes sense? Yep. Okay, and 16 is just noting the additional direction that was given. We don't need to list all of that. Happy? I'll move that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Edwards. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Okay. Okay, now we're just going to move through to 5E, which is the proposed budget changes for 24-25. Deepu? Any comments you'd like to make?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is just our standard year-end carryover report that we bring around after the year-end every year. So table 1 of the report highlights sort of the overall impact on our net operating and capital positions for 24-25 based on the changes being proposed. Table 2 then breaks down sort of the carryovers by activity, and these are all sort of early delivery or under delivery of various projects. And Appendix 1 has details about specific projects and initiatives that have been either delayed or accelerated. Table 3 has a summary of other budget changes that have been either reported separately in this agenda or are being proposed. So there's the Jackson Street program renewal, there's the regional water services delivery plan, and this one, it's not reported elsewhere, but it's basically just our share of the costs for the regional water services delivery plan. And we are highlighting that this is based on an allocation, so there could be changes depending on other councils and whether they opt out of the model or not. We are recommending that it's funded from reprioritization of the operating budgets approved for Three Waters through the LTP. The next one is micromobility, which has a separate paper, and then the Cuba Street Overbridge, which is proposing transfer funding from Cross Valley Link program to fund the costs of the Cuba Street Overbridge, and it's got a separate appendix. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions from members? Councillor Parkin?
Kara, thank you for the report. Question on the Cuba Street Overbridge. Are we running the risk of actually overinvesting in a structure that is due for demolition anyway? And where do we draw that line?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor. So we've looked at a number of options. One was just to basically demolish and have it as a level crossing. But there is, in terms of timing for when that bridge will the Cross Valley connections will come online, that still will be way away from having that understanding. So it is a very busy line. It is a main route through. And it is, we need to work in with Kerry Rail around all of that as well. So our view is that it needs to be fixed. So this is the best option to get it up. So it's dramatically more seismic than what it is now, or able to withstand more seismic costs. So So they have had that money in the budget. We're now just seeking that little bit extra. So the urgent works and the monitoring is one thing. We're progressing with that pretty quickly, but this is around the piling and actually basically strengthening the ground attachments. So.
Any other questions? Deputy Mayor Lewis and Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. On page 52, the corporate services and the carryover for CapEx, mainly for building renewal works. I'm just interested in the building, which buildings?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, are you referring to the contingent facilities management fund or a different one? Sorry.
I don't know what fund it is, sorry, it's just corporate services.
I think, through you, Mr. Mayor, you're looking at the table 2, which has as its activity corporate services, and it's saying that OPEX is due to delays to community engagement and homeless strategy, CAPEX, which is not a significant amount of money, particularly for mainly building renewal. So that will be, I don't have a do, but whatever programs we have for things like seismic strengthening, the corporate contingency fund, they haven't all been done. So it's not new work, it's a carryover that to enable it to be spent this year.
Councillor Shaw.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions here, both on page 59. The first question is, what's a defects liability period in regards to the network resilience on Eastern Hutt Road? And if you can answer that one, I'll go to my second question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor. So that's basically when any work's undertaken, there is a period of time where it's under warranty, if you like. It's a liability period, but it may not necessarily cover everything. But we generally hold some of that money during that period.
Thank you. And the second question, I mentioned it earlier, there's significant work alongside State Highway 2, especially around the Taita Rock, where there's a wastewater pipe almost exposed above the river. And I'm just wondering, has this been included in any carryover budget or identified as a priority project anywhere? Because we don't want to risk another Days Bay.
If I can answer that one, it's not in any of our budgets at the moment.
Okay. Councillor Shaw, any? Yep.
Yeah, is there the potential for this to be looked at? I've put an elected members request in, so I'd appreciate to look at for that particular one. I walk this stretch of the river quite often and just fairly recently seen quite a bit of land movement, what I think is land movement from the particular spot that's identified. It worries me about raw sewage coming into the river.
Bruce, yep.
As this is a joint venture asset, we'll report that to the next meeting of the Hutt Valley Services Committee.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. No other questions? We'll move the recommendations which are in front of us. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Parkin, have the second. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Those against no. Declare that carried. Received no questions. We'll now go to our closing karakia. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia e te uru tapunui, kia wātia, kia mama, tēnākau, tia tina, tia warua e te aratakatū. Koia re rongo, whakeeri, aki, kia runga, kia wātia, ora, kua wātia, hau paumarie. Declare our meeting closed at 10:50. Of course, we're back at 11:30 for